Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. May all the peace and blessings of the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be on all of us. Now part 2 of that is the heart, that today I want us to discuss the internal structure of the heart. Now as you can see on the whiteboard, we have the internal structure of the heart. When we are discussing the internal structure of the heart, we will be starting with the chambers of the heart. We are going to compare the two chambers of the heart in terms of volume as well as the walls. We are going to see types of blood received by the chambers, comparison of the walls of left ventricle and the right ventricle as well, their volume, the septum, valves, tendons, and semilunar valves, and if possible, we may look something about the circulation of blood. Now let's look class. The heart has 4 chambers. The heart here has 4 chambers. The heart has 4 chambers. 4 chambers. What are the 4 chambers of the heart class? The 4 chambers of the heart are 2 atria, 2 atria, 2 ventricles. If you have a rough sketch of the heart like this, like that, you're going to see here are the 2 atria and these are the 2 ventricles. And therefore we say that the heart basically has 2 atria and 2 ventricles. And therefore the heart has how many chambers? In total, the heart has 4 chambers. Good. The 2 atria and the 2 ventricles. Again, if you compare the walls and volumes of the atria and the ventricles, we are going to see that the atria are thin-walled as compared to the ventricles. Good. Again, let's look at the type of blood received by the chambers. The type of blood received by the heart is either, number 1, we have deoxygenated blood. We have deoxygenated blood. We also have oxygenated blood. Now, which part of the heart receives the deoxygenated blood and which part of the heart receives the oxygenated blood? Now class, as you know that the heart is divided into 2 halves. The heart is divided into 2 halves by a muscular wall called the septum. By a muscular wall called the septum, divides the heart into 2 halves. That is the right half and the left half. And therefore class, the right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the body tissues. The right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the body tissues, and it enters the heart through the vena cava. Now the deoxygenated blood, if I have the deoxygenated blood here, deoxygenated blood, deoxygenated blood. Now for the deoxygenated blood class, it enters the heart through the vena cava, deoxygenated blood, vena cava. From the vena cava, the deoxygenated blood goes to the right auricle, the right atria. From the right atria, it goes to the right ventricle, Now from the right ventricle, blood is pumped out of the heart through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, through the pulmonary artery. But meanwhile class, when the blood enters the heart through the vena cava, this blood is deoxygenated, and the deoxygenated blood comes from the body tissues. Why class are we receiving a deoxygenated blood from the body tissues? We know that the blood carries oxygen from the heart through the aorta. Now, when this blood returns to the heart, it is deoxygenated. That means the body cells, tissues, and organs they require oxygen. And therefore, as blood passes through the body tissues, cells, and the organs, they absorb oxygen until the deoxygenated blood is being drained back to the heart by the veins and the superior vena cava, through the superior vena cava. And therefore we say the veins act as a drainage to the heart of deoxygenated blood. Now class, the blood enters the heart through the vena cava. It goes to the right atria. Now between the right atria and the right ventricle, we have a valve, and that is called the tricuspid valve. There's a valve here called the tricuspid valve in between the right atria and the right ventricle. We have a valve called the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve here, tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. Now class, again, from there the blood goes to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, blood is pumped out of the heart through the pulmonary artery. And at the base of the pulmonary artery, we also have another valve called the semilunar valve, the semilunar valve, the semilunar valve, the semilunar valve. We're going to see their function later, but let's now look at how the blood flows. Now from the pulmonary artery class, the blood goes to the lungs. This one was initially, it was this blood, deoxygenated blood. Now it goes to the lungs. It goes to the lungs. Now class, in the lungs, what happens? What happens? Because we know the lungs, they add oxygen. The blood, deoxygenated blood becomes oxygenated. In the lungs, the deoxygenated blood becomes oxygenated. Oxygen is added. Oxygenated blood. Very good. Now in the lungs, the oxygen is added to the blood. Now from the lungs, what happens again? The blood returns back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. Through the pulmonary vein. The blood returns back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. Through the pulmonary vein. Now class, from the pulmonary vein, the blood flows to the left atria. To the left atria. Left atria. From the left atria to the right atria. No, from the left atria to the left ventricle. From the left atria to the left ventricle. Pulmonary vein, left atria, left ventricle. Now from the left ventricle, blood is pumped out of the heart through the aorta. Through the aorta. Through the aorta. Now this blood is oxygenated, is oxygen-rich blood. And therefore, this blood that is pumped out of the aorta and is taken to the body tissues. Again, from the body tissues, now to body tissues, body tissues, body tissues, body tissues. Now the body tissues, they take up oxygen in blood. And therefore, the blood that is now coming back to the heart again is oxygen depleted. The blood that returns back to the heart is oxygen depleted. Basically, the oxygen is being used up, or rather absorbed by the body tissues and cells for various life processes. For instance, the respiration to break down food substances to release energy for various functioning of the body cells, or rather metabolic processes of the body. Now, from the body tissues, the blood gets back to the heart through the vena cava. Now I think you can see how blood flows from the heart, lungs, and body tissues, and that is the circulation of blood in heart. And this class is what we call the double circulatory system. The double circulatory system. What's a double circulatory system? It is a circulation where blood passes twice through the heart for every complete circulation. Class, we are saying that double circulatory system is a circulation where blood passes twice the heart for every complete circulation. Now let's look. From vena cava up to pulmonary artery, this is circulation 1. This is circulation 1 of the heart. You see, from the vena cava, because vena cava is a structure of the heart, up to the pulmonary artery, that is a circulation in heart. Circulation 1. The second circulation is after the blood, the deoxygenated blood is taken into the lungs for oxygenation. Now the oxygenated blood gets back to the heart before going to the body tissues, because the blood is essentially needs to be supplied to the body tissues and cells. Now again, the oxygenated blood from the aorta, from pulmonary vein up to aorta, is also the heart. 1, this is 1 and this is 2. And therefore, class, we say that the blood passes twice the heart for every complete circulation. And therefore, we can see that the circulation 1 was from vena cava to the pulmonary artery, where the blood was pumped to the lungs. Now from the lungs, the blood was returned back to the heart for the second circulation, and it ended up to the aorta, then to the body tissues. Now, because it was having 2 circulations, and therefore we say that double circulatory system being exhibited by mammals, as opposed to the single circulatory system where blood passes only once through the heart. And therefore, such organisms, they only have 1 atria and 1 ventricle. An example is the fish. Very good. Now from there, I want us to discuss another thing. We have 2 types of, again, system. We have circulation. We have the pulmonary circulation. We have the systemic circulation. Now I want us to look at what is pulmonary circulation and what is systemic circulation again. Now if you keenly look at this, the pulmonary circulation. Let's start with the first one. Pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation. Now, pulmonary circulation is a circulation where deoxygenated blood from the heart is pumped through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, and oxygenated blood from the lungs is pumped into the heart through the pulmonary vein. And therefore, such a circulation is called pulmonary circulation. And basically, pulmonary circulation starts from here, pumping blood from the heart through the pulmonary vein, and the blood coming from the lungs through the pulmonary vein is what we call the systemic circulation. And therefore, this one is what we call the pulmonary circulation. The pulmonary circulation. The pulmonary is a circulation where blood is pumped, the deoxygenated blood is pumped out of the heart through the pulmonary artery to the lungs for oxygenation, and the oxygenated blood from the lungs pumped back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. That is called pulmonary circulation. Now, let's look at the systemic circulation. Systemic circulation. Systemic circulation. Now, class, systemic circulation basically is about a circulation where blood is pumped out of the heart, the deoxygenated blood, not any other blood. It is a circulation where it's a circulation where oxygenated blood, this one is oxygenated blood, is pumped out of the heart through the aorta, while the deoxygenated blood from the body tissues gets back to the heart through the vena cava. This one, pumped out, oxygenated blood. Now let me write, oxygenated blood, deoxygenated blood, pumped out through pulmonary artery, and oxygenated blood returning back to the heart through pulmonary vein. Now, this one was pumping out deoxygenated blood, and it was receiving oxygenated blood. That is called pulmonary circulation. For systemic circulation is a type of circulation where the heart pumps oxygenated blood through aorta, It pumps oxygenated blood through the aorta and receives deoxygenated blood through vena cava. And therefore, that one is a systemic circulation, whereas the other one is a pulmonary circulation. We say pulmonary circulation is a circulation where deoxygenated blood is pumped out of the heart through the pulmonary artery, while oxygenated blood returning back to the heart through the pulmonary vein, while systemic circulation is a circulation where oxygenated blood is pumped out of the heart through the aorta, while deoxygenated blood returns back to the heart through the vena cava. That was briefly about that. Now, let's look at the comparison of the walls of the left ventricle to that of the right ventricle. We say that the left ventricle is thicker than the right ventricle. Left ventricle, the LV, the left ventricle, the muscles, the walls of the left ventricle is thicker than those of the right ventricle. The walls of the left ventricle, the LV, is thicker than the walls of the right ventricle. Why? Class, what we know is that the right ventricle, this one, it pumps blood only to the lungs, right? While this one, the left ventricle, it pumps blood to the whole body tissues and organs. Very good. That is a very simple statement. We say the right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs only, while the left ventricle pumps blood to the body organs and tissue, all body organs and tissues. Again, if you want to elaborate further, you can say this one, for it to apply to pump blood to the distant body organs, it needs pressure. And for it to have a pressure, these walls must be thick. Because if you want, even logically, if something has to pump to a longer distance, it has to have higher pressure. Right? It has to have high pressure. Now, for it to have a high pressure, it needs to have thick muscular walls. And we know relationship between volume and pressure. And therefore, as such, we say the volume of the left ventricle is smaller than the volume of the left ventricle. Now, let's look. Let's say we have a left ventricle, we have a right ventricle, thick walls. What about the volume? Less volume. Smaller volume. Now, the walls of the left ventricle have thick walls. Why? Primarily to be able to generate high pressure to pump blood to the distant body organs. Or, in a simpler way, you can say the left ventricle pumps blood to all body tissues and organs which are far located, while this one, it only pumps blood to a shorter distance, that is the lungs. As well again, this one has a smaller volume. Why? Because the smaller the volume, the higher the pressure. And you know the ratio between volume and pressure is that when volume is small, pressure will be high. And when volume is high, pressure will be low. They are inversely proportional as such. Very good. Now another thing I want us to look at is the septum. The septum is the thick muscular wall that separates the heart. It's a thick muscular wall that separates the heart into two halves. That is the left half and the right half. It separates, first function of the septum, it separates the heart into two halves. That is the left half and the right half. Another function of the septum is it prevents mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Let's continue. The valves. Class, we have primarily valves between the atria and the ventricles. We also have valves at the base of the pulmonary artery and the aorta. Now, the valves found between the two atria are called cuspid valves. These are the valves found between the atria and ventricles. These are the valves found between the atria and the ventricles are called the cuspid valves, or rather the atrioventricular valves. Now, what does these cuspid valves, or rather the atrioventricular valves, do? They prevent backflow of blood into the atria when ventricles contract, right? Again, we have valves. The valves found on the right side of the heart are called the tricuspid valve, while the valves found on the left-hand side of the heart are called the bicuspid valve. Again, we have cup-shaped valves at the bases of the pulmonary artery and the aorta. They are called the semilunar valves. They are called the semilunar valves. Likewise, the semilunar valves, they prevent backflow of blood into the ventricles when ventricles relax. They prevent the semilunar valves. They prevent backflow of blood into the ventricles when ventricles relax. Again, we have tendons. These ones are the ones which are holding the valves into the walls of the ventricle. They hold the valves into the walls of the ventricle. What do they prevent? They prevent the valves from turning inside out when under pressure, when ventricles contract. You see, the tendons, they hold the valves in the walls of the ventricles, thus they prevent them from turning inside out when under pressure. When will these valves be under pressure? When ventricles contract. Now, when are the semilunar valves open? The semilunar valves are open by the pressure generated when ventricles contract. The semilunar valves are open by the pressure generated by when the ventricles contract. And the third class, basically about the heart. We discussed about the circulation of the heart. We also discussed about the structure of the heart and their comparison based on the walls as well the volume. And that is briefly about the internal structure of the heart as well the circulation of blood in the heart. Wish you a nice weekend and a fruitful Ramadan. Thank you very much.